Lina, el vídeo.
¿Listo? ¿Lo reproduzco?
En América Latina y el Caribe contamos con altos índices de pobreza e inequidad que se evidencian en una brecha para alcanzar el cumplimiento de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Es necesario que promovamos una articulación más efectiva entre las formas de generar impacto y los actores que despliegan sus recursos financieros y no financieros. Solo así podremos garantizar un mayor impacto social y ambiental.
Somos la comunidad de proveedores de capital humano, intelectual y financiero comprometida con alcanzar soluciones de mayor impacto en América Latina y el Caribe.
Impacto é esse articulador que pela primeira vez reúne a todos os atores do ecossistema social e ambiental que investem na região, fomentando aprendizados, colaborações e conexões.
Somos el puente entre filántropos e inversionistas de impacto. Conectamos la rigurosidad del mundo financiero con la filantropía.
La diversidad geográfica y sectorial de los miembros que reúne Impacto evidencian el valor que estamos generando.
Impacto nos conecta con la comunidad más grande de proveedores de capital que hacen parte de nuestras redes hermanas en Europa, Asia y África e inversionistas por impacto en Norteamérica.
Desde la Academia Impacto promovemos conocimiento y el intercambio de mejores prácticas sobre la inversión y la gestión social y ambiental.
Esto se complementa con la gestión de conexiones. A través de Por Impacto, nuestro banco de iniciativas compartidas por los miembros, se presentan las mejores opciones de colaboración y coinversión.
Promovemos espacios de conversación y facilitamos alianzas como una oportunidad de inspirar y conectar propósitos en toda la región.
Aquellas organizaciones que invierten en conocimiento, conexiones y relaciones generan mayor impacto en sus intervenciones. Sé parte de Impacto.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those joining us from Europe. Good evening for Kemin and those joining from Asia. As you watch in the video clip that we just launched today, Impacto is a community of capital providers committed to achieving solutions with a greater social and environmental impact in Latin America and the Caribbean. Today, we have more than 100 members. We bring together individuals and organizations, all of them capital providers from any sector investing in Latin America and the Caribbean, who are interested to deploy in a more strategic way their financial and non-financial resources for a greater social and environmental impact. Impacto is part of a family of networks in Europe, Asia, and Africa. EVPA, AVPN, and AVPA are Impacto's CIRCES networks in those regions. These networks jointly comprise more than 1,300 members and have over 70 years developing an extensive body of knowledge in social investments. Thanks to this relationship is because today is with us Doug Miller, visionary philanthropist that created the 4 networks, including Impacto, and Kevin Tan, who is based in Singapore and work close with AVPN in Asia. At that Impacto, we want to strengthen investments along the continuum of capital, promoting new models of investing and improving more strategic use of its resources, aimed at generating greater social or environmental impact with different risk profiles. We built a bridge between two non-opposing but rather complementary worlds, traditional philanthropy and impact investing. Being said that, let's focus on the topic of our webinar. Today, we have the privilege to know more about the social impact guarantees. Kevin Tan has experience working with this new type of outcomes-based funded model in Singapore, and today he will explain it in detail. The idea is that our community of social investors get to know more about these innovative models and explore how we can replicate them in Latin America and the Caribbean to accelerate innovation, stretch fund resources, and improve program results. The invitation today is to have an active discussion with Kevin and the audience that is with us. Welcome, all of you. Let's think out of the box and explore new possibilities to improve more significant impact. Before inviting Kevin to talk, I have the privilege to introduce Doug Miller. Doug has a vast experience. Let me share with you only two issues about the impressive background of Doug. The Social Impact Bond was first created with a portfolio company sponsored by the Venture Philanthropy Fund, where Doug was a director in the UK, Impetus, now called Impetus PEF. Also, in London, there is an organization called Bridges, which I am sure many of you have already heard of. Doug was on the advisory board while living in London, and they created the funds to funds that invested in pay-per-performance deals. This allowed much more capital to be consolidated into a pool. I invite Doug to share briefly more about his experience, and then we will invite Kevin to join us. I will ask some questions to Kevin, but I invite all of you to participate. This session is a virtual coffee, and all of you are invited to share and learn. Doug, please welcome. We are always pleased to know more about your experience. Welcome, and thank you very much for all the support to that impact.
Carolina, thank you for that nice introduction, and I'm very pleased to be here because this subject is close and near to my heart, as Carolina has already explained. I actually requested to be a part of this webinar for 5 reasons. The first one is that I've known Kevin for 6 or 7 years, meeting him first here in Boston, where he was working with Third Sector, which is an intermediary that was developing the SIB product in the US. I've watched him over the last 6 years across a number of different geographies. He was clearly smart, clearly dedicated to the cause, and we need next generation new ideas. I've known, as Carolina explained, I've been involved with the SIB projects since the beginning, because the organization which was responsible for delivering the outcomes was an organization backed by Impetus, where I was one of the first founding directors. Incidentally, Ronnie Cohen, who is the chair of Impetus and is the chair of social finance and a number of other things around the impact investment industry, was also an investor in Impetus. When Kevin returned to Singapore, he was in need of connections, in need of an office, et cetera, et cetera. So he hot desked at AVPN. He can tell you the value add, hopefully, that we brought, which I think was in connections across different parts of Asia. As Carolina had mentioned, it's very important that there be collaboration between different parties. So nonprofits, corporations, governments, et cetera. And the SIBs, or pay for performance, as I refer to them, is a good example of that. But to get an SIB or pay for performance to happen, you need an intermediary, an organization who can cover all the different aspects and bring the people together. So I'm a very firm believer in what Kevin is doing in Singapore, and think that a version of this, obviously it needs to be localized, is something that would have great potential for Latin America. So the purpose of this webinar is to explain more about it, ask Kevin questions. If I can add anything further, some myself. As far as Kevin is concerned, you've seen his bio on the invitation. I'd like to mention some specific highlights. He's launched a number with a team, a number of SIBs in the US. He's advised on SIBs in Israel. That probably relates to Ronnie Cohen, who's also quite a player in Israel. He launched the first SIB in Hong Kong and has advised one in Japan. And he launched the SIG, which is a social impact guarantee based product in Singapore. So he's done a great job of developing the market. I think it's very relevant for Latin America, and we hope we get a considerable engagement with the people here and others who are part of the Latin Impacto network. So Kevin, Carolina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Doc. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. Kevin, welcome. Good evening for you. We are aware that it's 9:14 in Singapore, so thank you for joining us at this time. We read in detail your article that you posted on the Stanford Social Innovation last August, but we want to know more about you. Please tell us more about your personal journey from studying and working with the government to founding 3 Sector Associates. Tell us more about you, and welcome again.
Sure. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Carolina, Doug, and team. Actually, my entry into this world of impact investing had something to do with Colombia, funnily enough. How I first came about this whole concept was I was doing my graduate school in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School in Boston. And one of the big case studies over there was actually about a social impact bond that was launched in Medellin in Colombia.
In Bogota, yes. We have Daniel Uribe with us and Sebastian from Stigler. And Daniel.
Right, exactly. Oh, hello. Great. Well, it's wonderful to be able to meet people who inspire you so much. So I first came across the case study and I thought, wow, what a wonderful idea. Perhaps there are ways in which it could be applied back home in Singapore. And the reason for that is because having grown up in Singapore and seen how in the Singapore context, government was the main way in which everything was solved, the question for me was, how could we evolve that model to both bring in more people from the private sector, but also still preserve the role and comparative advantage of philanthropy and of charities. And what I liked about the social impact bond model at the time was that it tried to combine what everybody did best, government and agenda setting, the private sector and innovation, and charities in the ground. So after coming across this case study, I actually had the chance to join Third Sector in Boston that was trying to adapt this model that had originated in the UK to the US. And it may seem like, when we're outside of that ecosystem that, oh, it's a very easy transition, actually it's just plug and play. But actually it's not. There was a lot of relocalization that was required to make it work in the US. And that same relocalization, I think, occurred when about 2 years later, after having launched some of these projects, I had a chance to go back to Singapore to finally fulfill my goal of bringing it back to Asia. And here, as Doug said, it was me as one person with Starbucks as my office. And I had the chance to sit in the AVPN office where, it was wonderful to see all the different sides of the social impact investing platform come together and literally just walk through the door in the AVPN office. So through that was really invaluable in helping me understand what exactly is the value proposition in a place like Singapore of these new impact investing instruments. And why it was important to relocalize is because, in Singapore, government does not have a budget deficit. So the traditional way in which social impact bonds are pitched, which is we're going to help you pay for stuff you can't pay for today, doesn't quite make sense in the East Asian context. So by being part of AVPN and sitting in the office, I got to discover that actually there was a different reason, which I can talk to you about why we're doing in Asia. We actually went not just to Singapore, but I went with AVPN to Hong Kong, to Taiwan, to Japan, to actually speak to all these different stakeholders and governments there and understand what the commonalities were between them. And that's how Trisector started. So since then, we've gone from my one person in Starbucks to about 7 or 8 of us now inside a pretty fancy, impact area in Singapore. We've had the chance to work on some of the first such projects here. And I'm very excited that since launching this sort of adapted social impact bond concepts, we've helped evolve the model a little bit further and do the guarantee, which I'd like to talk about in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. We always talk about the importance of collaboration. We know that collaboration is key in solving social and environmental problems, but please let us know, please share with us the key elements you have found to create successful collaborations.
Sure. Yeah, I think collaboration is one of these things that it's a motherhood statement, who would say, I don't want to collaborate, right? So I think the key in successful collaborations that I've seen has been the hard question of what is the value of this collaboration above and beyond each of us doing it ourselves, and net of any sort of transaction costs or work that needs to be done as a result of collaboration. So that's what I thought was quite nice about some of these different social investment models that are coming up, which is that they're not just trying to get people together for its own sake, but they're really trying to analyze from a blank piece of paper, what is it that everybody's supposed to do best, and then create a forcing mechanism, a platform that uses data, that it ensures an alignment around outcomes, to get everybody to work together towards a common end. So, I know the social impact bond and all these different tools sound like pretty niche products, but actually, if I told you, hey, we've discovered a way in which we're going to get the private, people, and public sectors to sit together, agree on a common set of goals. Each one will take parts of the value chain that they're really good at, and then we're going to do a project together. You'd say, wow, that's great. And that's actually all that the social impact bond and the guarantee is trying to do. So I think we need to create these mechanisms by which people can work together. And there needs to be some sort of value to everybody that's taking part and to the outcomes as a whole.
Okay. You told us at the beginning a little bit about the social impact guarantees, but please tell us more about details about that. How are they different from social impact bonds?
Sure. Well, there's sort of a lay way to think about it, and then there's a slightly more nerdy technical way. I think I guess a lot of people have woken up at 8 a.m. to listen to this webinar, so maybe the nerdy way might be a way to start, and then we can kind of zoom out. So the nerdy way is that social impact bonds I think have been much vaunted around the world. It's very exciting. But I've probably been to more social impact bond webinars like this than there are social impact bonds in the world. The reason being that they've just proven so tremendously difficult to do. To give you an example, my firm in the US, we launched probably the biggest social impact bond ever. It's $30 million. But it took us 3 years to do. It's $30 million over 6 years, on top of $1 billion a year budget for the government. So, really, we're making an impact, but it's pennies on the dollar, right? So why is that? And I think that there are two reasons. One is that from the government side, which in the social impact bond is really important, somebody needs to pay for the outcomes. It's really hard mechanically for them to do what the social impact bond needs them to do, which is set aside money for multiple years and pay only if it works. Government's used to paying every year, right? So what always happens with a social impact bond is that you need to end up setting aside a special pot of money of outcomes funding, and that process just takes such a long time to go through with government. Then on the other side, for the investors, the returns on social impact bonds just look really bad compared to all the other impact investments that are out there, right? So maybe if you're a quasi-philanthropy, you might want to do that because it's better than just giving money away. But if you're really an impact investor, the social impact bond returns just don't measure up versus, say, what you could get if you just invested in a PE fund that claimed to be doing some sort of impact, right? So one of the reasons for that is because government does not value the time value of money. So they will never, what always happens in social impact bond is that the private sector invests the money, and then government repays it later if it works. But government has a certain cap to which they can repay the private sector optically, and they're not willing to pay the private sector what the cost of that money really is. So what the social impact guarantee does is it solves both of these issues on the government side and on the funder side. On the government side, it solves the issue by saying, why don't you fund us as per usual? But then just add a top up on top of that says, if the project does not work, we'll give you back the money. Now, and actually I have a diagram I'll show you so it kind of ends up in the same place. And then on the private sector side, it solves the problem by saying, because now we're using the government's money rather than your money, actually you can go invest it in something else in the meantime, and that actually allows you to get whatever private sector returns you might get, while still catalyzing this third source of money from somewhere else. And when you think about it, actually, the end point is exactly the same as a social impact bond, which is government ends up funding things that work and doesn't fund things that don't work. So if I may, I'll just show you a brief diagram. So this is how that model works. I think the SIB group might see this and might look pretty familiar. So as I said, the social service funders fund first. So this part, steps 1 and 2, look exactly like they would in the current system. And step 3 is just an extra step that actually government is kind of used to doing when it buys insurance of other kinds. So in that way, the money goes back to the social service funders if it doesn't work and can be used for other projects. So that's sort of the sort of in the weeds way in which the social impact guarantee helps to evolve some of the social impact bond problems. But just zooming out all the way and just thinking of what is it that we're trying to do at a broader level. When you think of our own experience, today I just bought the iPhone Pro Max, right? It's so expensive. And sometimes you look at it and you're like, wow, I'm not really sure if this thing is going to deliver what I want, right? And it may be innovative, but is it really something that I need or something that I'm willing to buy? And one way in which in the consumer industry, people convince you to buy innovative things is they say, look, why don't you buy it first? And if it doesn't work, I'll give you a money back guarantee. And that helps us as consumers take risks onto things that we're not entirely sure about yet. And also gives us some assurance as consumers that the guy on the other side has some reason to make sure that it really does work. So it's a quality control mechanism on the other side too. So the social impact guarantee actually basically functions like that, but for philanthropy and government. By applying a guarantee, we're helping government and philanthropists try things, push the boundaries of their measurements and so on onto things that they might not otherwise have been willing to do. And thereby we're letting the social organizations try all kinds of new stuff. But even beyond those two groups, the social organizations and the government, on the private sector side, we'll then manage to bring in new types of people because of the returns thing I talked about earlier, as well as people who are set up more for insurance. For example, banks with their letters of credit and insurance. And at a more macro perspective, I actually think that this guarantee can be applied beyond government to even places like philanthropy, maybe even some impact funds, or aid agencies who are keen to see not just the small amount of special money that they're trying to spend have this sort of impact, but the much broader pool of existing spending onto which they can apply this. So to give you, to close the loop on what I mentioned earlier, instead of that $30 million on top of the $1 billion budget that we did in the US, actually the government could apply a guarantee to the $1 billion and see whether or not that actually had the impact that they thought. So I think at the more macro level, my hope is that the guarantee can not just make the pool of things that we're going to do in the SIP easier to do, but also bring in new people and create new use cases and touch a lot more dollars than we would otherwise have been able to do.
Thank you, Kevin. We have seen that it is an improvement of social impact bonds, but I'm sure that you have found also obstacles and you have found some barriers to overcome with this new model. So could you please share with us what kind of barriers have you found with this new social impact guarantees model?
Yeah, sure. I'd say that so far, there have been two mechanical barriers. One has to do with the investor or guarantor mandates. And then I'd say the second has been to do with the ability of the social service funders to receive money back. So on the investor side, the guarantor side, it turns out that many of the investors who are set up to invest in SIBs today, or impact bonds, or other sorts of impact investments, their mandate does not allow them to provide insurance. So their mandate only allows them to provide loans. So even though actually net the returns on this after the premium, etc., might look better, just as because of the instructions they had when they raised the fund, they can't do it. So the way around that is to create a stepping stone, very much like how in the climate space there is a product called the CAT bond, the catastrophe bond. So here you can actually just get the social organization who's being guaranteed to basically take a loan from the investor and put it on their balance sheet immediately. And that basically allows us to overcome the mandate on the investor side, but also actually acts as a better form of risk mitigation for the investors than the traditional social impact bond tends to have. And oftentimes in the social impact bond, investors therefore say, government, you got to set aside the money too, so that I can be sure that I'm going to get paid. In this case, that actually helps to reduce that. Then the second item that I think has been a barrier are the mandates of the social service funders. So some of them have said, actually, if it doesn't work, I can't take the money back. So don't give it back to me. The way we've overcome that, I think, is similar to how we've overcome the same issue in the social impact bond. a lot of foundations who invest actually don't want their money back. So what we do is we say, that's actually great. Why don't you set up an instruction with us that says that if the money comes back, we'll gift it to a third party for you of your choice. So that way we actually overcome some of the mechanical barriers on their side as well. So those have been two more mechanical issues that have cropped up.
Thank you, Kevin. One of the reasons because we are here is because we are trying these innovative models to Latin America. So we hope that other investors here in Latin America can replicate the social impact guarantees model. What advice do you have for those organizations that are willing to explore social impact guarantees, and where should they start?
Right. Well, I think I'm very underqualified to give advice to Latin America, to be honest. All I can say is that the same tool can be used to solve different problems in different contexts. And so the question is just, what is the problem in the Latin American context that we're trying to solve? To give you an example from my experience on the social impact bond side, I've actually seen the same thing being used for different reasons around the world. In the UK, I think one driver was this desire for government cost savings. In the US, a lot of it was about data and innovation, trying to bring that into the social sector. In Singapore, it's a lot about capacity building and private sector participation. So I'm just curious about what the problems really are in the Latin American case that would require this to be adapted. In Singapore, one reason that the guarantee was a good model is that government itself can actually borrow very cheaply. So, when we say to them, why don't you use the social impact bond and borrow at this high rate from investors, they go, well, I can go to the bond market and get it for free or near free. So, but this thing about risk transfer and capacity building and bringing the private sector, that's great. We want that part, but not the borrowing part. So the guarantee actually lets them get that without the first part that the social impact bond has. But that's of course different in many other countries. I think in Latin America, there's a question of whether or not that really is the value proposition, and whether or not if it's not, the SIG model has something else to offer. So I'd say just take the model, strip out all the rationales that hung with it elsewhere, and then readapt it.
Thank you, Kevin. And now I just will end with these final questions, and I will open for Q&A. Please let us know how Impacto or AVPN what is the role in enabling more financial innovation, because you are close to AVPN and we are a new network in Latin America. So we want to know and to learn more from you. How's the relationship and how we can improve in Latin America from Impacto these new innovative models?
Yeah. Well, I think that they are certainly very critical. And I guess why that's the case is because, and I'm just thinking of Singapore as well as in this context. In Singapore, I'd probably say that this idea of innovative finance and philanthropy is actually quite a new thing, simply because the government has traditionally done a lot, so civil society has not really had to do all that much. And if left to itself, the Singapore ecosystem would probably just have looked at our own models and not really have looked outside. And each individual philanthropy would then have had to individually go and research what are best practice models out there, who else is doing this kind of stuff, and everybody would have their mini networks, all of which are pretty fragmented. Right? And in Singapore as well, I think it's pretty hard to find good philanthropic talent that's able to systematically do that kind of thing. So what AVPN is doing, I think, is really lowering the transaction barrier for everybody in understanding and adopting these new models. It's centralizing some of the talent, some of the knowledge, and I think making sure that there's more interaction between the different member countries so that they can all see what else is going on. So I think that's sort of the general role of a knowledge intermediary. What I like about the AVPN and other approaches, in terms of having the regional networks, is that because of this localization necessity, it's really important to have credible regional examples, and I think that's worth a lot more than a global case study. So at least in Singapore, for example, every time I say, okay, I've done all this work in the US, the response is not, oh, great, you have so much expertise. It's, oh, the US is, half a world away. It's inapplicable to Singapore, right? But when I say I've done this work in Hong Kong, or AVPN has a case study in Australia, people's eyes light up in a different way. So I think that kind of regional sharing that an AVPN or Impacto can do is really important, and it shows people that you're trying to advocate to that it's not just you. There's a whole bunch of other people who's trying to achieve the same end. So I think those are some really important things that these regional networks are doing. I think we've certainly benefited a lot from it. No affiliation, I'm not an AVPN office anymore. I don't get a subsidy of my membership fees. But yeah, I think they've done a great job in bringing this to the region here. And I'm very excited to see what else Impacto can do for yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin. And I hope that you can join us for our annual conference next April. So please save the date. And now I open for Q&A. Please ask your questions. Maybe Sebastian, Kevin talk about Instiglo, and you are working with Instiglo. Dani is the one, Daniel Uribe, leading the social impact one here in Colombia. And all of you are welcome to interact and ask your questions to Kevin. I think it's a privilege to have Kevin with us. Also to Doug, that is a pioneer with this innovative model. So please, welcome to ask your questions. Who want to be the first? Daniel Uribe.
Hi, Carol. Thank you, Kevin, for your presentation and for the introduction. Very, very good to learn more about this new evolution of the SIPS model. One question, Kevin, is how the relationship of the guarantors and the service providers? Because what we have seen here in Colombia, most of the social impact bonds have been tested for public innovations mostly, and the relationship within the investors, or in some cases the intermediary with the service providers, are actually building the capacity on mostly performance management. And when I saw your model, I had some questions on how is the performance management incentives working, because mostly guarantors are a little part away, from the relationship of the services themselves. So I wanted to ask a little bit more about performance management within the model, and that's one of the questions. And the second, what has been the experience on giving back resources to the government? Because I agree with you, probably for the investors and the other stakeholders, it will be easier to actually have recycling funds to reinvest, but on the government side, well, that hasn't been that common to give back resources to the treasury, or it depends on the program, but in some cases, depending on the performance, it's even not the best decision for them. So I wanted to ask those two questions, but thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you. I think both are very insightful questions, and I think certainly born from many years of experience on the ground. I think so. On the first one, you're absolutely right. We actually do the same sort of performance management that we would in the SIB, which is counterintuitive to many guarantors who might otherwise be more passive. When you buy insurance, for example, traditionally the insurer is passive. But actually, even in the insurance world, there's a lot of movement now towards preventative health, where they do active wellness programs and so on. So that's basically what the guarantor is doing here as well. So we set up things, for example, where there's the same sort of monthly governance meetings that we would see in SIB. There's the review of all the different outcomes. And in our case, actually, the guarantor has done two things. One, he's agreed that if there's some sort of need to put in more resources to achieve the outcomes, he's willing to do some of that. And also, if the guarantee does not get called, just like how in insurance, your premium gets reduced in the following year, he's willing to re-guarantee the same pot for future. So that's a very strong incentive, stronger than if we had, say, a 10% or a penalty or bonus. The prospect of having the whole thing renewed really helps a nonprofit think about how they want to fundraise in future. So in short, we do use the same mechanisms that we have in the SIB and the SIG on that front. Likewise, your second point on giving back government resources is a valid one, because my experience so far has been that government is not primarily motivated by financial resources in terms of giving it back. In fact, there's a headline risk for them here, where the headline says, project fails, great big windfall for government, right? And that's a disaster from a PR perspective for government if that's the headline. So actually, a lot of it is not about giving back money to government, but rather allowing government to use those resources to try again. So the provision of advanced instructions, for example, and how that money is going to be spent, or setting aside the money in a certain pot for the same outcomes, or redirecting it to the same organization to try again. I think that sort of mitigation seems to help avoid this problem of the headline risk. At least out here, but I think maybe things might be different in Latin America. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin.
Someone else? Doc, you raised your hand before.
Yes, first of all, I wanted to thank Kevin for his efforts and for what he's done in Asia. And then I had some specific comments. One is on collaboration. I agree with all that Kevin said, but one more thing which I have found crucial is that when people talk about collaboration, they basically say, we want you to fund our deal, right? But I always add there's another C in there, which is in order to have collaboration, you need compromise. So you need to evaluate the people not only on what they can bring to the table, but what is your ability to work with them, because all of these deals are going to require people to vary away from their basic standard. The next one is I pointed out that the first SIB was done in 2010. So that's 11 years ago, if my math is correct. And Kevin, I think you've got a better number than I have, but there's roughly been 200 SIB or SIB lookalikes. And what has actually happened on the first one, it took 2.5 years, and the amount of legal fees was almost as high as the amount of the bond. And the investors in that SIB were more or less the same people who had been funding the organization to do what they were doing. It was called St. Giles from before. So, but the point I want to make is that the evolution from that Model A Ford to, it's certainly not a Ferrari today or a Tesla, but it's come a long way. And the third thing which relates to that, which I mentioned before, is I'm from the private equity industry, and we started investing in the 70s. And it was a new product, a new whatever, but we made tons of money on that. But you could not recognize what's happening today versus what was happening a long time ago. So this thing is going to evolve in a great way, but to do that, you need intermediaries, as I said before. So if everybody, and so I'm a big proponent of intermediaries. And in the private equity world, you've got corporate finance houses, you have banks, you have accountants, you have lawyers. And they're all getting a little piece of the action. So in the nonprofit world, people are not getting a piece of the action. So it takes committed people, and it also takes cross-border learning. So, you know, maybe, I don't know, X% of what Kevin was saying is relevant, but Kevin got a lot of that from different countries as well. So those are just kind of observations that I would make. And I see some people nodding their heads and other people are probably too polite not to nod their heads. But is there a discussion that we can have? Because this is important for Impacto's addressing the market and what, you know, Alan and the Knowledge Center and everybody is going to do. So is there a discussion that can be made around that?
Thank you, Doc. And I hope that we can continue with the discussions of our conference. Sebastian and Andres. Sebastian, welcome.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here, and thanks, Kevin, for the presentation. A lot of what you said resonated with me a lot, especially when you said, you know, this is all about just getting private and public sector to put their minds together to basically use their skills to do the right thing. One question I had is, it also resonated with me when you said, well, the issue with SIBs is that they take a lot of time. It's an expensive transaction to put together. And I'm curious, you know, what, in your experience with SIBs, where does the time go? And how is it different when you create this other mechanism, the social impact guarantee? And the reason I ask this is because I think a lot of the time goes into, you know, setting up the indicators, negotiating exactly what you're going to pay for. And it seems like you might have to go through many of the same steps here. So I just wanted to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a good point, Sebastian, regarding what's the breakdown of the time. And I think that, you know, the way I think about transaction costs now is, just to be more fair, is that I kind of separate out into good time and bad time. You know, good time are things that we would have wanted the nonprofit and the government and everybody to do anyway. We just could never otherwise have gotten them to do it. And then bad time is really stuff that is like true overhead, you know, stuff that actually isn't really adding much value, but occurred because of this complexity that we've got. So I'd say that the good time here remains, as in the SIB, but it brings down the bad time. Yeah. Why it brings down the bad time is, I think, in a couple of fronts. First, I think on the government front, it drastically reduces the bad time because they don't need to go and get a special pot of money. So you spend a lot less time going to government and saying, are you allowed to spend money in this way? Can you go back to your Ministry of Finance and negotiate with them? And that's like a whole, you know, long thing, right? The second thing is on the legal sort of bad time. Rather than create a whole specialized list of new contracts, you know, that looks intimidating and so on, all we really had to do here was add one clause actually to an existing grant document, and that was very simple to insert. So whereas, for example, some of the first social impact bonds in our region, in spite of all the global knowledge we had, still required about 2 years to put together, and you know, that will go down over time. In this one, it took us about 2 months. And of course, you know, I'd also say that we cheated a little bit because the funder in this case was a philanthropy, so it was a bit easier for us to go through them rather than government. But still, I think that the time to completion was much better and had a much better ratio of good time. So yeah, go on.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, Kevin. Andres.
Kevin, how's it going? Here comes
Hello.
a short one. So here in Chile, we had a social impact bond during 2019, which was funded by philanthropists, and it didn't work out. We had to shut it down because of the consequences of the pandemic on schools. It was mainly pointed at solving comprehensive and writing skills for young kids. Since that one failed, we started another one, but this one is an outcomes-based fund, which is trying to lower down the rates of dropout school from kids. And one of our main challenges is this one is also funded by philanthropists, but we kind of want to involve the state in order to put at least 20% of the funds that we're aiming to collect to pay to investors. Is there any, or under your experience, did you have to negotiate with the state at some point in order to kind of involve them into the program? And if that happened, what approach did you take?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And just to clarify, when you say that the projects failed, you mean that they didn't achieve the outcomes, right? Because I guess there's a difference between the mechanism failing and the program.
No, it did. The mechanism didn't fail. The thing is that the programs were taking on schools, basically. They were taking during classes times and everything. And during the pandemic, we just had to shut down classes. It's something that happened probably worldwide. And after that, the programs were not available to adapt to like online services. So we had to just close it. The mechanism didn't fail, and it was just a program. So we just cut it off at that point. And this time we're doing another one, which has like the opportunity to adapt in case of if we go back to a pandemic situation. There's the programs are adaptable to take over online. And yeah, we're having that issue of getting the government involved in some sort of way.
Right, got it. Yeah, I understand. I just thought I would point out that distinction because, you know, a lot of people look at SIBs and go, that one failed, but actually the mechanism's doing what it's supposed to do, which is not have government pay for stuff that didn't work. It's the programs that fail, and actually a lot of times the programs fail anyway. You know, I think rigorous evaluation shows something like 75 to 90% of them work in traditional funding. But anyway, that aside, to your question, how do we get the state on board? Yeah, you know, I think in this case, the YMCA project that the article features, we did actually get them involved in a way. We actually used this project, this SIG, to enhance an existing program that the state was funding. So in this case, the state had funded something via the Community Chest, which is a government-run entity in Singapore, for about 10 years to help youth go back to education or training, youth who are outside of that system. And over time, the success rate of that program was something like 62% and constant. So the CEO of the YMCA, who was implementing the program, said, look, like it's our 10th year anniversary. We can't do exactly the same thing for another 10 years. So let's take this chance to try something very different. So much like the iPhone Pro, he decided that actually I'm going to enhance it with a whole bunch of new things this year. And I'm going to guarantee whoever gives me money that it will be a 10% increase in impact this year. And of course, at the YMCA, he can't take that risk in-house. So that's why he has a third-party guarantor providing the guarantee to the YMCA. So the reason we picked this program is because our hope is that if we can influence how that the extra 10% of outcomes are being managed, actually we're going to transmit all the best practices to the base amount of funding that the state's already paying for. And actually that's, I think, bigger by a factor of 2 or 3. So all that project management, all the good time we're spending on the project, actually all of that is not just affecting the small sliver that is being guaranteed, but all the rest of the money that the state is funding. And actually our broader hope is that once we do one of these as part of the community chest, then we can touch the rest of the community chest funding, which is $400 million a year. And for perspective, all the SIBs launched to date since 2011 is $400 million. So if we can do one of that with one agency in Singapore, the potential for changes is enormous.
Thank you, Kevin. We have 3 minutes for one final question. Who wants to ask the last question? Alan?
Hello, Kevin. This is Alan from Impacto. How are you? I'm wondering, maybe you don't have the answer, but I'd like to ask it because at the current moment, we're doing a impact measurement course here in Latin America with our members. And we're looking at theories of change, and we found that a lot of social investors and philanthropists don't really know how to add value to solve the problem. So it's really about really identifying what the problem is and really identifying what the additionality is. And I guess that to really be successful with an outcome-based mechanism or results-based, you really need to understand that additionality. So I was wondering if there's any tools that you use to really understand that, or how do you really come to that problem solving? Because without an understanding, I don't think a lot of these mechanisms will work.
Sure. Well, if I understand you right, the question is about how to, where to best intervene almost. And if I'm the private sector, I don't know if I have anything extra to add here beyond the current tools. I'd say that trying to intervene in a social impact bond is no different from, or guarantee is no different from how you'd want to intervene and the prep work you might want to do in at least a grant, but then with some extra layers of diligence. I think that the additional thing that is done in the guarantee or the bond model is the question of what is the extra value that this collaboration model brings that a traditional model might not. And oftentimes I think there's not enough thought put onto that side of things, other than, this is a cool new thing, right, that we want to do together. So there, I think we spend a lot of time thinking, so really, what is the delta that a hands-on private funder might bring versus a straight grant? Is it connections? Is it bandwidth? Is it time? And we try and get really concrete about that, so that when, to the earlier question, government comes to us and says, why can't I just fund that myself? Or why can't you just fund it yourself? And there's actually some real value add that we're saying concretely and we can point to. So I think that's the extra layer that we would do as part of the SIG or SID that would be above and beyond all the standard tools that you'd see elsewhere.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you. It's 9 o'clock here, 9 p.m. for you. So thank you very much for your time. We hope that you can join us next April for our annual conference, that we can continue this discussion and we can continue learning and exchanging best practices with our community. Thank you very much for being with us. We will share the recording link. We have some questions here, but unfortunately it's time to end today, but we will continue in touch. Thank you very much for all that joined us today. And we will share this recording link, as I mentioned before, and welcome everyone to join us on April 25th, the week of April 25th, to our annual conference. Thank you, Doc, as well, for being with us today. And thank you for all your support.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.